The Demise of an Irish Clan, Chapter 1, Prehistory. Celtic conquests from Gaul over Neolithic Iron and Bronze Age people took place during the second half of the millennium BC. They built up and established many small kingdoms called Dutha. This race of people from the kingdom of Galatia, originating from the upper Danube, Italy and Spain, formed the northern branch, which they ruled from their capital, Dublin. Their land extended over all Ireland, Wales, western and southwestern Britain, up England's western coast and over the border into Scotland. The Celtic race relied upon the Bards, the High King's soothsayers, who foretold the tribe's destiny through story. They were the purveyors of myth and legend, who passed on aspects of the community which drew the people together. They were members of the aristocracy, and didn't sit with the musicians, entertainers, and mercenaries placed near the door, but alongside the raised dais, close to the Lord's table. These bardic singers and storytellers extolled tales of heroes and gallant deeds, which were honoured and feted. It was a form of entertainment which included the broadcast of news, everyday events, and tales of the past. As an important side issue, which may not have been intended, the bards educated listeners in the facility and use of language that brought people together, instilling common cause and continuity. It gave the people a sense of belonging that lasted for generations. The religion, a cult built upon nature and ruled by druids, priests and prophets, were later called Brehons. They maintained influence by occultism and a knowledge of seasonal changes, things affected by the calendar, sun, wind and rain. Any matters the Brehons could not explain were wrapped in mysticism as matters concerning the other world. The bulk of the inhabitants were farmers and stockholders, working small rectangular fields, operating a cross-ploughing technique. They built dry stone boundary walls and drainage ditches, lived in timber round houses or pole houses, and stored surplus grain in pits. Ireland's people lived in a land of mountain and forest, bog and grassland, never far away from well-stocked lake and grazed pasture. The people calculated their wealth by the size of their herd and the amount of land under cultivation, and their gods reflected this concern and love of the land. The Romans never invaded Ireland, although they did stop the encroachment of Celtic people in Britain. Gradually, the Roman influence inflicted a pressure that forced them back, a socio-political and economic force rather than a physical one. The Romans, assessing quite rightly that the Celts offered no real threat, continued their march northwards, leaving their expansion into the metal-bearing western areas until later. The army that made up the Roman force were Germanic, an altogether stronger, fitter, and more advanced people than the Celtic farmers and stock breeders. They were a tried and tested body of people from a number of tribes, hardened by their transient life, fighting, building roads and bridges, organizing logistics. The Celts were no match for them. Ptolemy listed, in the 2nd century AD, the names of Irish people in the P-Celtic form, which was the language of Britain and Gaul. The group of people we are interested in were recorded in this writing, and they were the Cruithni, linked to the Ciarraige tribe of Connacht and North Kerry. We continue, for we are still in the land of the Munnu, in Munster. This book relates to central southwestern Ireland, the northern half of counties Limerick, Tipperary and Offaly. These three counties are bordered to their north by the river Shannon that bears the two lochs, Derg and Ree. Inland, south of the river, the gentle rising land sweep up to the range of mountains. The early Christian church had as one of the 12 apostles of Ireland Saint Ciarán Sagas, the elder. He was the first bishop of Ossory, one of the 4 who preceded St. Patrick. He founded Ciar Culdub, County Offaly. Ciarán is an Irish personal name meaning little dark one, related to Ciar, who was a son of Fergus, king of Ulster. The name is associated to Ciarraige as one of the Ciar people. The Atlantic sweeps into the mouth of the Shannon until it reaches Limerick, under 2 bridges past the Salmon Weir onwards to the entrance of Loch Derg at Killaloe. South of the estuary of the river Shannon, river and loch, were populated by a tribe recorded as the Medon Meartain. Over time, this tribe was weakened by war, by encroaching raiders and warring neighbours, their lands appropriated by the thrusting Inacta, a southern tribe expanding northwards. These people flourished, and as all tribal groupings made up of extended families, some closely related, others not so, but all contributing to the main group. The ruling suzerain, High King, held this land called Munster. It was sometimes referred to as a cashel, which means a stepped, walled settlement, relying on a hierarchical system based on obligations owed. Obligations to pay for protection, farm the land, take part in social gatherings, contribute to clan activities and share benefits. These obligations, once accepted, were never withdrawn in life or death, but continued through the succeeding generations. The leader, Muirdac, 325 to 355, maintained his position by strength of arms, proved in battle. His position was no sinecure, because extended families were large, particularly the chiefs, and there was always those envying his position, perhaps disputing his leadership, so he had to always be on guard. Muirdac's son, Stockade, 356 to 365, married Mongfind of Munster, and from this union future kings of Connaught reigned. His second wife, Karen, was daughter of a Saxon king and an ancestor of the O'Neill, Prince of Connacht. She was also mother to Neill Ninegallach of the 9 Hostages, 379 to 405, so called because of the 9 tributary tribes that owed him homage. He was High King of Erin, Ard Rí, the Gaelic form of High King, referred to as King of Tara. Neill, who eventually became one of the supreme rulers of all Ireland, founded this ruling body. The marriage of Eccled and Karen brought together an alliance between the Saxons, Irish and Picts, a royal line called O'Neill, descendants of Niall. This continued for almost 1,000 years, only being broken by Brian Boru, king of Cashel, who, although reigning king and afterwards by others, never ousted the name and fact of Neill as representing true national identity. When Niall died, Connaught and the kingship of Ireland passed to his nephew. His sons, Ian, Conall and Enda, took over smaller parts of the kingdom in northern and central southern Ireland. It was Ian of Illig who now ruled as High King of Munster, and from his eldest son was born Fiachra. It was in this fashion that the Inach line was born. Ill the king is vanished, vanished Crogan's fort. Kings of Clonmacnoise now come to pay their court. Illig ruled from a great stone castle built on a 600-foot hill, at one time the stronghold of Bronze Age kings. A treaty was drawn up between all the clans which divided Ireland into two parts. The dividing line passed between Dublin and Galway, partway following the river Shannon. The king of the southern part was recognised as the High King of Cashel. Cashel, Tipperary, is situated in a fertile plain, sitting on a rock holding a stone fort. It was built in the 400s as the seat of the King of Munster. St. Patrick, 432 to 459, preached there, converting Angus, the king. In 1101 it passed into the hands of the church that bestowed it upon Murtagh O'Brien. Ossory covered the present county of Kilkenny and the southern portion of Lee, populated by the Ciarraige tribe. Ciar refers to a nondescript colour, and it could be black, grey, brown or tan, and this could describe the people's clothes, their hair or skin. It's also a family name. They became part of Ciar's people. They became vassal people who owed an allegiance to the Inach, who were the successors of the holy Cartac tribal lands, including all those affiliated clans with similar names and family connections. The clan was under royal protection of O'Neill, descended from the Connacht when Ciar Culdub was slain. The hierarchy of kings was adapted to the older structure of provinces, Ulster, Munster, Connacht and Leinster, and within these there were two kings vying for supremacy. They were competing for the revenues and title, provincial kings claiming overlordship over lesser kings, one of which was the forebears of the O'Keefe. Often these kings had to fight to enforce their claim, and both admitted the supremacy of the High King of Ireland. It's almost impossible either to work out the dominance of a particular tribe over another, or to form a linearity of leading clans, especially if you try to put a date to each. It has to be pure conjecture, for there are no compatible pieces of evidence to back them up. All one can do is assess the likelihood that one was at the time of. Britain's 5th century history revolves around the return of the Roman army to Italy and the disintegration of almost 500 years of Roman influence. The roads remained, the buildings suffered from lack of maintenance, but the language and the social mores remained to be adapted. Irishmen were to some degree unaffected by the turbulence which followed the Romans' retreat back to Rome. Christianity spread from the monasteries of Gaul, reaching Ireland at about the same time. It was then that there were great changes to the Irish language. By about 540 AD, the time of Finian, the monks had begun to take over some of the power of the Brehons. Finian died in a plague about 10 years after the foundation of Clonard. By then both Ciaran and Columba of Terrygrass were in the 20s. St. Ciaran of Clonmacnoise from Connacht was the founder of the abbey near Loch Ree, and Columba, the greatest of the later generation monks, founded Iona. St. Ciaran was another of the 12 apostles of Ireland. He died on the 9th of September 546 at the age of 32, and he is buried in his little church attached to the abbey. The rural society of this time was not one based upon towns or villages, but ring forts, lake dwellings, and later monastery settlements. The people populated smaller communities of much cruder construction, with little or no stonework, but simple pole houses, often with an open roof, built on an earthen mound with ring ditches and offset entrances.